Hello and welcome to Skypothesis. We are super excited to share our very first build for Fallout New Vegas. It's hard to believe nearly 11 years have passed since this gem of a game was released. If you can look past its graphical limitations, you'll find a masterpiece of storytelling and role-playing that really has no equal. We like to take inspiration from all across the world of entertainment to create our character builds. If you've never played New Vegas before, we hope this video inspires you to play it through for the first time. Or, if you're a longtime veteran, we hope you will return to the Mojave with a fresh perspective and a deeper role-playing experience. The NCR Insurgent is a highly offensive, combat-focused character, and is built around two game mechanics. One, getting critical strikes with assault rifles, and two, crafting deadly, homemade explosives, which he will use to sow chaos as a one-man army. The NCR labels him an anarchist, but he doesn't consider himself one. He firmly believes that power over people is always corrupt, and there must be an opposite force to strip that power away. However, he is not interested in assuming the voids of power he leaves in his wake, nor does he believe it his responsibility to consider the negative consequences of his actions. He knows that his role in this world is to take down tyrants, and he trusts his own judgment so completely that it gives him the courage and justification to kill, if he believes it's for the cause of freedom. He is a pure idealist. To him, the world doesn't need governments. As long as there are people fighting under a flag, humanity will never move on from the wars that tore itself apart. All the people need is someone to spark the revolution, and then they must take accountability for their own freedom. He is proud, sure of himself, determined, and very flawed. This is his story. The young insurgent grew up in a small farming community north of Shady Sands. Even as a child, he was never one to dip his toes in things. If he did something, he did it thoroughly and completely. From the sports he played with the neighborhood kids, to boot camp when he grew up and enlisted in the NCR military. This passion was always directed towards something, and he thought military service would be a worthwhile cause. He followed in his father's footsteps and became a soldier. After boot camp in the hub, he became a scout and was among those who traveled east and made the initial contact with New Vegas. While on a scouting expedition, he learned that his small hometown had been thoroughly sacked by raiders that came west along I-80. There were no survivors. The young insurgent did not re-enlist, and instead took up work as a courier. His training as a soldier kept him safe on dangerous roads, and this gave him a stable income even if the pay wasn't great. More importantly, it helped him with his grief. There is something about being on the move that calms the soul. Maybe that's why infants calm down when rocked. His infant soul had been stirred up and needed calming. He spent a couple years on the road, but his mind was still restless. The more he thought, the more the reports detailing the raid didn't make sense to him. The numbers didn't add up. The town guard had firepower and should have been more than enough of a match for the 80s raiders. Between courier jobs, he snuck into NCR communications buildings to do his own investigating. What he found made his blood boil. Nobody was on comms duty the day of the ambush. Scouts had sent in reports of raiders on the move, but these were never forwarded. Some lazy comms officer took a 4-hour-long smoke break. His town should have been warned, but wasn't. His parents and all his friends died needless deaths. This was documented, but all he received was a letter of apology filled with platitudes and half-hearted praises to his family's service. He smelled the stench of apathy rotting away at the NCR. In his digging, he found that this comms officer was promoted to be the warden over a new NCR correctional facility just across the Nevada border. He makes sure his next courier package takes him en route to pay this man a visit. Unfortunately, the insurgent was too late to bring his own justice. As he passed Prim, he learned the entire platoon had been slaughtered by the very convicts they were watching over. The ironic fate was amusing, but unsatisfying. He laments that this chance for revenge was taken from him, and in his distracted rage, he didn't see the ambush set up by Benny. He wakes up in Goodsprings with a new lease on life. Somehow, he was spared an untimely death. Though he was never much of a believer in religion, his mother was, and now he wonders if there was some higher purpose at play with the sparing of his life. But for now, he decides that avenging his family's death can wait. This punk with a fancy suit needs to know that he messed with the wrong courier. The first leg of his journey is catching up to Benny. This is a good opportunity to gather intelligence on what's going on in the Vegas Valley. There are lots of side quests along the way that can be completed to build up XP and roleplay his intelligence gathering. There is no rush here. He figures his would-be murderer has already made it back to Vegas, so he uses this time to spy on the major factions and figure out what's going on. We chose to acquire the motel room in Novak to be his home base throughout the game. It has lots of storage, but more importantly, it's guarded by Boone and away from prying eyes. As a side note, we like to use this time just before you meet Benny to gather all the snow globes we can. The gun we want is expensive, and getting an extra 12,000 caps will really help. He tracks military movement and activities on his journey. He documents all the NCR outposts and the movement of Caesar's Legion in the south. Information is crucial in war, and he doesn't yet know how this game of chess is going to play out. He knows it's reached a boiling point, and somehow this Mr. House is both simultaneously at the center of it, but disconnected from the conflict entirely. He learns the significance of his patron and decides to play along for now. Besides, he doesn't like leaving a job unfinished. However, his encounter with Yes Man completely derails everything. He learns Mr. House can be killed, and Benny's grand plan suddenly makes sense. Instead of accepting Caesar's invitation, he flees. All eyes are on him. The NCR, the Legion, and Mr. House are all watching him intently. He felt like a pawn that each player wanted to sacrifice to reach a checkmate. He panics, flees Vegas Valley entirely, taking work as a guard to the merchants of Happy Trail's caravan. You should be about level 12 at this point, which is the ideal time to start this DLC. New Vegas is filled with opportunities to shape your character through choice and roleplay moments. For the Insurgent, none of these moments are more character-defining than his time in Zion with Joshua Graham, the Burned Man. This should be the first DLC you complete, not just to get the armor, but because it's just so important for his story. This is the moment when he chooses to be active instead of passive, and that his life was spared for a divine purpose, to be an agent of freedom fighting against the tyrants and oppressors of the world. He respects Joshua Graham and admires his confidence and his faith. He can see what is wrong with the world and has the guts to cut a path right through it to what is right. Even if it's a difficult path, the Burned Man will take it. In his words, "I pray for the safety of all, but we can't expect God to do all the work." He even quotes scripture to justify his actions. Contrast this with the missionary Daniel, who wants to end the fighting and lead the sorrows to a peaceful resolution, even if it means abandoning their home. He tries to persuade the Insurgent to help them leave peacefully, but Joshua Graham is more persuasive. He and the Burned Man take the offensive, kill Salt Upon Wounds, and drive out the Whitelegs permanently. Before leaving, Daniel leaves behind a book of scripture with the hopes of inspiring peace and forgiveness in the Insurgent, but this backfires, as he reads passages that he uses to justify his violence. Assuming this book is the Book of Mormon, which it most likely is considering the origins of the New Canaanites and the geography of where they are, he reads a passage that states, "I seek not for power, but to tear it down," and this becomes his mantra. When he returns from Zion, he is a very different man. He has grand plans to tear down the tyrants fighting over this godforsaken valley and needs some serious firepower. First stop is Nellis Air Force Base, where he plans to woo over the isolationist boomers and recruit their firepower. Also, you'll get the rebreather and complete his rogue militant aesthetic. Next stop, killing Mr. House and using Yes Man to upgrade his robot army. For the factions, his allies will be Yes Man, the Powder Gangers, the Great Khans, Freeside, and the Boomers. He respects those who claim their own independence. These are the factions he will either reach maximum reputation with or will back him in the battle for Hoover Dam. We reached idolized status with Novak as well, as it's a town of scavengers, and the perfect home base for a bomb maker. His enemies are the Legion, the Brotherhood of Steel, the Fiends, and finally the NCR itself. In my playthrough, I also ended up getting a negative reputation in the Strip, but it didn't matter at all since he considers it vile and maintaining its independence was only ever a means to an end. It doesn't matter the order you start taking out your enemies, but it's smart to leave the NCR for last, as they occupy a huge portion of the game map, which will make getting around difficult if they're hostile. For our playthrough, we roleplayed sabotage and spying, and saved outright warfare against the NCR for endgame. There are lots of side quests that let you silently stick it to the NCR, like destroying the research in Vault 22, or directing water away from NCR crops. If you roleplay being a saboteur, the side quests around Vegas are super fulfilling. The final battle will see the permanent withdrawal of both the Legion and the NCR, the Brotherhood destroyed, the Great Khans all dead in a suicide rush at Hoover Dam, but Vegas is independent, for now. One of this character's flaws is not thinking far enough ahead, and the unfulfilling void left behind leaves him with no real closure, and an absolute mess of a Sin City to deal with. Instead of sticking around Vegas and claiming his throne, we roleplay that he leaves Vegas entirely and heads back up to Utah to spend his days with the remnants of the tribes of Zion. Perhaps there he will finally find peace. For his companions, the two best options are either Raul Tejada or Eddie. Raul's perk makes weapons decay slower, which is super useful since we will be using the Bozar, which deteriorates faster than normal, and because we're using the trait Built to Destroy. Make sure you complete his quest Old School Ghoul before declaring war on the NCR. If the NCR is hostile, you won't be able to finish this quest. Eddie is another great option. He acts as a portable workbench, and since we will be self-crafting explosives and stuff all the time, this is incredibly useful. However, his real strength comes from the Lonesome Road DLC, when you can install an upgrade that allows you to raise the condition of your weapons by 25% once a day. For his gear, he will wear Joshua Graham's armor, the rebreather, and a bandana which grants +1 perception. We are sticking with light armor for the crit bonus from the perk Light Touch, and Joshua Graham's armor is the perfect fit. Of all the light armors, it has the 4th highest damage threshold at 15, and the Salt Lake SWAT theme is just too cool to pass up. The rebreather lets you breathe underwater, but we're mostly wearing it because it looks cool. Ulysses' mask is a good option, but Lonesome Road is usually the last DLC done, so you won't get that until much later. Plus, I always prefer gearing up my characters relatively early. The bandana is a bit tricky to find. I found mine on a Freeside Thug, but they can also spawn on Vipers and Jackals. If all that fails, Burt Gunderson does wear one at the Aerotech Office Park, so get your pickpocket or murder on. For his primary weapon, we are using the awesome Gunrunner's unique rifle, the Bozar. This thing is the definition of function over form, and the Insurgent babies this thing, keeping it polished and in top-notch condition. It has a strength requirement of 8, which we will be lowering to 6 with the weapon handling perk. It uses cheap 5.56mm rounds, has a pretty mediocre crit rate, but we will overcome that with all of our perks, and its insane fire rate. Its increased weight makes it steady and accurate, so it's equally useful both aiming down the scope manually or picking off enemies in VATS. We are taking a couple perk bonuses to VATS, but most of the time I just used iron sights. Even non-VATS builds will occasionally benefit from using it against fast enemies like Cazadors. If they survive your explosions, you'll be glad you have it. Finally, to represent his revolutionary anarchist side, he will be self-crafting tons of makeshift explosives like gas bombs and tin can grenades. New Vegas has the most impressive array of ways to blow people up I've ever seen in a video game. The perk Mad Bomber adds 7 new explosive crafting recipes, and that's on top of the 41 other things in the game that explode or shoot explodey things. He is a one-man army and will use ambush tactics whenever possible to get an explosive drop on enemies and then finish off any survivors with his assault rifles. I really felt like a lone revolutionary, poking around abandoned sheds for any scrap electronics, tin cans, and duct tape. There's a real sense of satisfaction that comes from making your own bombs out of junk. Alright, now let's discuss character creation. The Insurgent will start with a very well-rounded special stat spread. He will have 6 strength, 6 perception, 6 endurance, 3 charisma, 6 intelligence, 6 agility, and 7 luck. His experience and training as an NCR soldier made him versatile, and his time on the road made him adaptable. We tried to hit a sweet spot here with high enough of the stats that matter to make him a good all-rounder build. Moving on to traits, he will take Skilled and Built to Destroy. Skilled reduces the experience gained by 10%, but adds +5 to each skill. In our opinion, the benefits to this far outweigh the cons. He's pretty good at everything, but only great at a couple things, so you'll be getting a head start, and that's super useful. With an intelligence of 6, the progression of XP is pretty negligible. Built to Destroy adds 3% crit chance, but weapons decay 15% faster. That might sound terrible at first, but all the crit sources really add up fast, and the benefit is huge. We will be overcoming the weapon decay with a high repair skill and companion perks to offset it. For tagged skills, you will want to tag Repair, Explosives, and Guns. These are his 3 most important skills, and the boost from tagging them will help you get some relevant perks as early as you can. Now let's talk about perks and skill leveling. In Fallout 4 and Skyrim, you can just kinda wing it as you go, but New Vegas requires planning, or at least it feels like it does. When I'm not prepared with a perk spread, I'm always worried that I'm not being efficient with my points and that I will miss an important perk due to not having a high enough skill. For all of our Fallout builds, we've decided to place an important stat requirement next to the perk in the list. So if you're following this build guide, you can just screenshot this to know what your targets are. As you can see, the only thing that matters is getting Explosives, Repair, and Guns up early. None of the other perks have an important requirement, so you have a lot of freedom here to allocate extra points into other categories. Would strongly recommend Stealth and Barter. The Bozar is expensive and chews through ammo. Plus, since you're scrounging around so much for scrap, you might as well get the most caps out of selling any extra gear you find. We focused on general improvements to explosives, two-handed rifles, and critical hits. After level 30, we focused on capping out special stats of luck, perception, and a few more in endurance for survivability. There are a bunch of useful perks available with things like implants and robotic organs from Big Mountain, but we left them off this list since none of them significantly alter his gameplay in any way. Roleplaying as the NCR Insurgent was a fun experience. He is a flawed character, but sometimes it's fun to explore the game with a different lens. This is one of the things that makes New Vegas the greatest RPG ever made. Humanity and all its flaws is so beautifully explored in this conflict over Vegas. Humans have learned and unlearned lessons of society, morality, and governance over and over again throughout history. And in New Vegas, these lessons are projected into a fantastical sci-fi future in such a believable way. Fallout is a sci-fi, filled with wacky creatures, aliens, and science that can't possibly exist. And yet, sometimes that is the best platform to explore the real topics. This game asks philosophical questions on the nature of humanity. You have the bright lights of Vegas to distract and dazzle and indulge in taboo pleasures. Contrast this with the harsh and unforgiving land it's built on, and you have so many opportunities to explore human nature's need to distract from the ugly truth of mortality. Then you have the different types of governments vying for power. You have dictators, flawed democracies, freedom fighters, isolationists. You've got scientists who work for the sake of progress and to end human suffering, only to have their work misused and stolen away by the power-hungry. What other game explores all of this and gets it right? The main quest doesn't have a clear best path. There's bad, questionable, worse, and slightly less worse. In spite of this, it manages to avoid being nihilistic. It shows that in spite of humanity's flaws, most people are good. The NPCs you run into on your travels are just living their lives as traders, farmers, and heck, even the super mutants just want to be left alone. The NCR Insurgent has many opportunities to explore being a character of extreme beliefs and to put those beliefs into action. The desire to have freedom from oppression and his extremism has led him to place some blame on these ordinary people of Nevada for not taking accountability for their own freedom. It is everyone's responsibility to fight tyrants, and he hopes that his actions will inspire these lackadaisical citizens. But instead, he leaves a wake of destruction and death. He is a force of unintended consequence, and the player is forced to ask themselves if it's all worth it, and more often than not, the answer is either no or it's complicated. Thank you so much for watching this video. We really hope that you've enjoyed this build. Fallout New Vegas is such an important game to us, and it still has so much to offer even after all this time. If you like what we do, please be sure to like and subscribe to keep the magic of the Mojave alive. We'll see you next time, right here on Skypothesis.